So with no further ado, Professor Mrווין ברקוביץ on character education. Mrווין, bevakasha.
Thank you, Hanan. I hope everybody can hear me just fine. Thank you to you. Thank you to Nirit. Thank you to the whole commission, Tammy, and the rest of you. I am deeply saddened that I'm not physically there. This was a chance to come back to Israel after 30 years of not having been there. So the cost of COVID, you can add to that my sadness over not being able to make the trip to Israel, but hopefully we can do that in the future sometime. Special thanks, as you've already heard, to my friend and colleague Zahavit Gross for recommending me, and to the wisdom of the committee for listening to her. So I feel great time pressure for all this, so I want to move forward as quickly as I can. I am going to share my screen. I hope this all works well. We'll give it a shot and see if we can pull it off. And put it on slideshow. There we go. Hopefully you can see these slides are in English with one or two exceptions of phrases that Zahavi helped me with, but the rest of it's in English. So this notion of primed is essentially a product of over 20 years of work. And I will explain it more as we go through, but it's going to be the heart of what we're talking about. First, shalom. Hello to all of you. I'm glad to be here. And I want to give you a sense of why I think this is an important topic, so you understand who I am and how I approach this. And I give you three ideas here. The first one is doing this work is important, and doing it well is important because there's no off switch. You can't avoid doing this. Every one of you in the audience who's an educator, in fact, Aristotle said over 2,000 years ago that every adult who's around children impacts their character, whether you like it, intend it, or not. There's no choice in whether you do character education or values education and so on. The choice is simply whether you do it well or not. That's the real choice. And the second one, which it took me a long time to figure out, is tikkun olam. And I realized after a while that this is my purpose. This is why I do this work. That as a developmental psychologist, and that's my training as a child and adolescent developmental psychologist, I can heal the world best by investing in the flourishing of children. And so doing that optimally is my way to contribute to healing the world. Heraclitus said character is destiny. The character of the people is the destiny of the society. I can't imagine a country that knows that better than Israel. And that if you don't invest in your people and who they are and who they become, I saw the same thing in Singapore. That was a strategic move in Singapore when they were founded 50 some odd years ago, to say our only natural resources are people and we must invest in them to have a future, and it worked. And the last thought is that this is not a competition between academics and character. Good character education is good education. The pedagogy of good character education maps directly onto the pedagogies of effective academic education. And to quote, I'm going all over the map. You're going to see Buddha in here. You're going to see all sorts of people. We went back to ancient Hebrew wisdom and tikkun olam. I'm all over classic Greeks. But Teddy Roosevelt, former president of the United States, said to educate a person in mind and not in morals is to educate a menace to society. Simply making people masterful at academics with no moral compass is danger. I apologize if there was a translation of the PowerPoint because I just added this slide, and I realized I wanted to throw out very quickly 4 framing thoughts. And the first one's actually a joke, but it's one of the more insightful jokes that I know. So I'm actually going to tell you a joke now. So to the translators who had my PowerPoint in advance, I apologize, but I do want to say that I was listening to the English translation before I started speaking, and the translators are good. They are really good. I've worked with translators in lots of languages all over the place. They're fast and clear and accurate. It's impressive. So, so here's the joke, and this is always a mean thing to do to translators, to ask them to tell a joke. But there's a man who's walking down the street one night. And as he's walking down the street, he sees down at the end of the street another man. And that man is on his hands and knees underneath a street light, looking through the grass. And he's looking and looking and looking. So as the first man approaches him, he says, "Hi, did you lose something?" And the man on the ground says, "Yes, I lost my car keys. I can't get home." And so the man who was walking down the street said, "Well, let me help you," being a good Samaritan. He got down on the ground and started looking through the grass. Well, it was a small patch of grass. Very quickly, it was clear there were no keys in this patch of grass underneath the streetlight. And so he said to the man who had lost his keys, "Are you sure you lost your keys here?" And the man who lost his keys said, "No, I lost them about half a block back the other way." And the helper said, "Well, then why are we looking here?" And the man who lost his keys said, "Because the light is better." Think about it. That's what we do in character education all the time. We go where the light is better rather than where the keys are. If there's anything I accomplished today, is to help you start looking where the keys are rather than simply looking in the light, which everybody does all around the world. The second framing thought is backward design, an approach. Over and over, everywhere around the world, I see people use vague terms like values education, character education, social emotional learning, positive psychology, and democratic education, citizenship education, without digging deeply into what is it they're really trying to impact in children. And the only way to do this work well is to meticulously define what is it specifically that we want to change in the children that we are educating. And only then can we go backwards to methods and pedagogy. We can only choose our methods if we know precisely what the outcomes we're targeting are. And I do this all over the world, and I've been doing this for over 40 years, and this is almost another epidemic like COVID. The last one is a shift, and I'll come back to this one later, but it's a shift from focus on doing to being. The greatest impact that we have on children's character is by the way we be with them. That's butchering English. I don't know what the translators will do with that one, but it's the way of being that matters more than the specific practices we do. It's not that the practices don't work, but what's more powerful is who we are and how we are with children. And the last one is just this cautionary note that I think Hanan talked about and others did, what I call a semantic morass. As I say, I've worked in this field for over 40 years. I've worked under the title moral education, values education, character education, values in education, morology when I was working in Japan, positive psychology. The names change from region of the world to region of the world. They change over time. My advice is get over it and get past it. If you're trying to, as I'm going to tell you in a moment, I like to call it, if you're trying to nurture goodness in human beings, I don't care what you call it. And if you're using effective practices, I don't care what you call it. So forgive me for using the term character education. It's part of my job. I'm the McDonald Professor of Character Education, so I use that term. But I'm happy to switch to values education or social emotional learning, as long as we're precise about what we mean by it. So what is character? This is one way to frame character, and it comes from my colleague David Shields, who talked about these 4 domains. I don't have time in this talk to go into any depth in this. As you can see from this horrible graphic, I haven't figured out how to do this very well yet, but they overlap is the point. It's kind of like a 4-part Venn diagram. There's the moral piece, which has to do with ethics and goodness. There's the performance piece, which has to do with effectiveness. There's the intellectual piece that has to do with pursuit of knowledge and truth. And there's the civic piece, which is being able to contribute to society. And there are parts of our character that load on each of these. But they, as you see, they overlap. The real point of this one is know what aspects of character you're looking at. My heart says, please don't leave out the moral part, because I think it's the most important one. I remember years ago, when I was at the Air Force Academy, there was, I wish I remembered his name now, but he was an Israeli general who was giving a talk at the Air Force Academy. And he talked about this notion that they wanted to make sure that every soldier comes back human, and that we have to take care of them and make sure they're still human beings and we don't dehumanize them. And I thought it was brilliant to say, let's keep this moral compass there. So here's another definition of character, and this comes from an organization, which I should have fixed that on the bottom, because they've changed their name to character.org. They now use their URL as their name. So they're no longer the Character Ed Partnership, they're now character.org, if you search for them. But this goes back at least as far as Johann Pestalozzi, and probably back to the classic Greeks, and who knows where else. That good character has three parts. The cognitive piece, understanding. We need to teach to kids knowledge of character and to their capacity to reason and use reasoning to figure out character. There's an affective motivational piece, the caring about. We need to teach the kids' hearts. We need to get them to have the requisite moral emotions and other emotions, sympathy, empathy, compassion, and so on. And to have the right motivations. They have to care about this. If they simply have the head and know what our values are, but don't care about them, we fail. And lastly, there's a behavioral piece. They have to have the capacity, the hand, to do this work, to be a person of character, to do tikkun olam, to heal the world, and they have to actually do it. So what is character education? Well, as I said, I tend to think about it a little differently. And here comes Buddha. I see it as a way of being, and a way of being with others. Now, this doesn't come from some mystical place. It comes from my work as a developmental psychologist. And I will tell you a quick thought experiment you can do for yourselves, but we don't have time to do now. I've done this all over the world. If you look inside yourself and say, what's one of my character strengths? What is something I hope people who know me well notice and appreciate about me? And there's no need to be humble about it, because we all have them, and you're not going to tell anybody. So just, you can think for yourself, but then ask yourself the more difficult question. How did I become that kind of person? What shaped me? What formed me? And I'll tell you quickly what I hear all over the world. The most common one is one or both of my parents had this characteristic and modeled it for me. You can think for yourselves if that was the case. For some other people, it's some other significant adult in my life had this characteristic and was a model for that. And then for some people, it's the negative models, usually a parent. One or both of my parents didn't have this. They were violent, they were dishonest, they were weak, they were abusive, they were whatever. And I vowed I would never end up like that. And then some people talk about life trauma, that life trauma brought out of me a character strength that was necessary. And for some people, it was simply a self project, that I decided this is the way I want to be. And I deliberately worked to be that way. Nobody has ever told me in answer to this question that my character came from a curriculum, that my character came from a lesson, that my character came from a school assembly where we got together and sang songs about character. No one ever told me that it came from a poster on a wall. No one ever told me it came from a reward that I got or someone else got for character. No one's ever told me that's where their character came from. So that's this notion of the way to effectively impact character is by how we be, how we are with others. And for most educators, it's changing our way of being. It's new. So this is the definition I'm using now, and I have a book coming out in April on this model of primed, and I'm calling it Nurturing the Flourishing of Human Goodness. And I love this quote from Paul Houston. who said our schools are perfectly designed for the results we're getting. If we don't like the results, we need to redesign the schools. Every one of you who is a principal of a school, the head of a school, or the head of a classroom, just a teacher, you can think about, are you getting the academic achievement that you wanted, ideally? Are you getting the behavior change and the development that you wanted, ideally? And if you're honest, you'll say, no, you probably fell short of that mark. Well, unless you redesign the way you are and the way your classroom and schools are, you're crazy, because insanity is doing the same things over and over, expecting different results. So this is the model now I'm going to rip through pretty quickly. It's called primed, and it's simply the first letter of each of these 6 big ideas. I now call the prime model 6 design principles for character education. Now I know, and Odette wisely said we're looking at moving from knowledge to practice. We want to take care of that, right? And that's really what I want. What we did, the way this came about, is we spent 20 years collecting those practices, collecting the evidence-based practices by scouring the research. And as we did that, we had this long, long list of what is effective practice. All sorts of different things, like doing cooperative learning and class meetings and cross-age buddying and integrating it into the curriculum and on and on and on. We had all of this, and we've written on this. We have papers on this. And then slowly I started realizing these things tended to cluster. And they clustered under these 6 categories. And these 6 categories then became sort of meta categories that are really ways of approaching how we think about our schools. They're principles for designing school improvement. And so underneath each of these are specific practices. And I'll allude to some of them. What I'm used to doing is full day, full week workshops on prime, taking the same thing I give you in 10 or 15 minutes and spending days or weeks or a whole semester or a year on it. My Leadership Academy for Principals is an entire year-long academy. And I will give a shout out right now to Lior Zoref, who's listening in, who is an Israeli high school principal who's living in the US for 2 years. And so he's going through my Leadership Academy while he's here. So he's listening in because I told him about the conference. So this is a whirlwind tour, and I will not be able to do much on the specifics, but we have written this, and the book will be out in April, and it goes through all of the practices and so on. So let's, just before we get into that, to tell you that in 2018, the US Department of Education identified PRIME as one of 5 evidence-based national prevention recommendations for school safety, which I was stunned at because I hadn't written it up yet. They heard me speak at a national conference and they realized this was a good one. So somehow it got in there. I was pretty amazed. And this is the information for my forthcoming book. By the way, at the end, I'll put up a slide with my email address. The organizers have my email address. If you want to, somebody can stick it into the chat while I'm speaking. Feel free to contact me. All I ask you to do is, 1, do it in English, because I don't speak Hebrew or Arabic. I have to go to one of my colleagues to figure out what it says. 2, let me know who you are clearly. That I listened in on your talk for Israel or whatever. And very specifically, what are you asking me? I get emails all the time. Hi, this is Joe. What's the name of the book? Joe who? What book? I don't know what you're talking about. So that's all I ask. And I'll be glad to let you know about any of this. So let's go through these. First, prioritization. The P in PRIME is prioritization. And it's the most important one because it says, if doing this work is not an authentic priority in your classroom, in your school, in your district, in your country, then it's going to be far less effective. And so you have to ask yourself, is it the primary goal of the school? Now, I'll go to the US model because I know it much better. And when the US was founded, centuries ago, the founding fathers said very clearly that the destiny of this nation will depend on the character of the people. The same thing that Heraclitus had said. And that education is about preparing people to run an effective democracy. And I assume you're thinking the same thing I'm thinking right now, which is we're failing. And I believe that deeply. One of the first thoughts I had when all this craziness has gone on for the whole last 4 years, but certainly for the last week or two, is this is a condemnation of what we're doing in character education. We're failing. When we have a nation where there are so many people who think the way a lot of these people think, we have not done an adequate job of raising and educating the next generation to understand tikkun olam and the common good and being a virtuous citizen and what democracy is about. And we have to redouble our efforts and do it better. But it needs to be the primary goal. And leadership is a key to this. Okay, I've spent the last 20 years deeply mentoring over 1,000 school leaders. I take 30 in a cohort. I spent an entire year with them. It's being done in Milwaukee as well now. We replicated it for a couple of years in Kansas City. It's starting up in a mini version in Spain now, and we're doing a mini version in Colombia as well. It's just critically important that the school leader understands this, because the head of any organization, whether it's a country, it's a military squadron, it's a corporation, it's a school, whatever it happens to be, a faith community, the leader has more sway than anybody else. And they need to know what this stuff is, how to do it. They must deeply invest in it, and so on. These are some of our leadership initiatives. I don't have time to go into detail, but the Leadership Academy we've been doing since 1998, and that's this full year version. We have a video-based version of it that's being translated into Chinese and Spanish, and could be used in Israel if people wanted it. Civil is a focus on the virtues of servant leadership. We deeply embrace the notion of servant leadership from Robert Greenleaf recently. And SEAL is a research project that we're doing currently by wedding all of these things together into a year-long academy plus mentoring by established successful leaders of character education. So here are just some of the examples of evidence-based practices for prioritization. One, we certainly need a rhetorical emphasis. We need a language, ideally a shared language and shared goals and shared values, or whatever you want to call it. It needs to be clear for everybody, and we need to sing it to the heavens all the time. It needs to be part of our constant rhetoric. I remember when I was working with the Ministry of Education in Singapore, the then Minister of Education was renowned for the fact that every single speech he ever gave focused on character. And people were actually tracking it to make sure he never slipped. It was part of the rhetoric. But rhetoric's nice, but it doesn't get you very far. It's like a highlighter pen. It emphasizes something that has to be there already. So we also have to allocate resources. And this conference today is an example of it. We are allocating resources today, our time, the cost, staffing, and so on, toward this work. The leaders of schools have to do this. They have to invest particularly in professional development, which is why I spend so much of my time working directly with the practitioners. And I was trained as a ivory tower, egghead social scientist, but I morphed into an educational psychologist, and I spend most of my time doing professional development, and probably neglecting the research more than I should. But this is what's calling to me now. We have to make sure that we create the culture and the climate and the context for this to work. That there's trust in teachers, that teachers have a trusting community amongst themselves. And we have to build school-wide structures. We have to restructure our schools, rethink our schools. One of my good friends, Shelley Berman, who's a distinguished superintendent of schools in the US, when he had the need for a new high school, hired an architectural firm with whom he worked to design it specifically to promote social responsibility. The physical design of the school, architectural design, was geared towards the goal of educating for social responsibility. And then, as I said, leadership, I already talked about that. So the R in Primed is about relationships. And what I've come to conclude is that I don't know if people know this in English. In English, we have the 3 R's of education, which were reading, writing, and arithmetic. It doesn't translate because it's not arithmetic, it's arithmetic, it's poetic license. Don't worry about it if you don't get it. Now there's a new 3 R's, which is rigor, relevance, and relationships. But I think the 3 R's of character education are relationships, relationships, relationships. These are the molecules from which we build both good character and healthy schools. And when you look at the reviews of excellent academic pedagogy, relationships are in there as well. And they're in there for character education. So we have to say to ourselves, do we do an adequate job of building relationships? And here are the things you need to ask yourself. Who's being included? Relationships between whom? Certainly teachers and students, that's the easy one. But what about the non-professional staff and the parents and the administration and the community members? And do they all have relationships with each other? Is somebody being left out or some category being left out? Secondly, are we doing it strategically and intentionally and structurally? Do we have structures? Do we have times in the day for relationship building? Because educators come to education with golden hearts. They truly love children and they want the best for children. But they falsely believe that because we have golden hearts, healthy relationships will develop. And in fact, it's true, they will, except for the people who need it most, except for the kids and the adults, because there are adults like this too, who have some mental illness, who are too shy, who don't have the social emotional competencies for relationships, who maybe just are different than others in some way, shape, or form. And they end up falling through the cracks and not having those relationships. And only when we're strategic and intentional and structural does everybody have the opportunity for healthy relationships. I can't do it. I don't have the time. I'm going to skip the next 2 slides and go to this one. Sorry, I'm making an executive decision on that one. One part of relationships that's frequently forgotten is the adult-to-adult relationship. And the adult culture of the school is a critical piece of both academic success and character development. We know from the great work of Anthony Breich and Barbara Schneider that the relationships amongst the adults directly impacts the academic achievement of children in schools. And it's the leader's job to take care of the adult culture. I like to tell leaders all the time that if you do 2 things, if you invest in the professional development of your staff and you shepherd an ethical, caring, professional learning community amongst the staff, you can go in your office and play video games all day long and your school will still be brilliant. Because those are your key tasks as a leader. Can you manage the adult culture? And can you invest in the optimal professional development of your staff? The staff will take care of teaching the kids. So some of the strategies for relationships, the biggest one, and I'm sure you load heavily on this one already, is peer interactive pedagogies. Academic methods that require productive peer interaction. Cooperative learning is a good example, reading circles, peer tutoring, there are so many of them. Okay, but to do as many of them as possible, because they're good academic pedagogies, but they're good for character too. Directly teaching the interpersonal skills that students need, social emotional competencies, for getting the most out of those peer interactive pedagogies. Building relationships with family and parents, and building relationships with other community members. I'll tell you one quick story, which I love, which is an elementary school in the city, a primary school in the city of St. Louis, pretty poor, under-resourced area. And the principal, Janice Wiley, who died this year, unfortunately, many years ago, once a year would have her primary grade students cook a breakfast, decorate tables, write invitations, and they would invite their neighbors, the owner of the restaurant down the street, the manager of the park across the street, the local police officers. They'd invite them in and simply say, thank you for being our neighbors. They'd make them and serve them breakfast. They'd sing them songs. They'd decorate the tables. And there was no ask. They didn't ask for anything. That was it. Just thank you. And they built brilliant relationships that paid off later on when they needed to go to the park to do some kind of science thing. The manager of the park was happy for them to come because they had treated them so nicely, and so on. It's just a very small example, but it's an example. The I is intrinsic motivation. This is probably the toughest one for most people. Educators typically rush to using extrinsic motivators, to giving rewards, to having big assemblies where we march across the stage in front of the whole school, the most sterling kids of character this week or this month. These are things we do to kids in schools, and as parents, we don't do this with our children at home. Okay, I'm sure all of you who have children want your children to have good character. I doubt that very many of you start every day with reading a quote about character, preferably through a speaker in the ceiling. I doubt that very many of you have signs up around your house with a single word on it that says honesty or compassion or respect or responsibility. I doubt that many of you have little signs around the school naming your spaces, you know, benevolent bathroom or caring kitchen. I doubt that many of you walk around with little slips of paper in your pocket, giving your kids rewards for good behavior that they can trade in later in the day for a pencil that smells like a strawberry and sparkles. And I doubt that many of you convene your family once a month to announce which member of your family had the best character that month. I doubt that you do those things with your family. I know that you don't. But we do them in schools all the time, and they don't work. Look at self-determination theory and the work of Rich Ryan and Ed Deci. Some of these things actually undermine the internalization of the very values you're trying to promote. So we need to know what really works. The true goal of character education is for children to take these values, these virtues, these character strengths, whatever you call them, into themselves so they become who they are. And wherever they go, they take them with them. I remember this poignant conversation with my son, who's now doing wonderful and working at Apple and living in Silicon Valley, but he struggled mightily in adolescence. Toward the end of his adolescence and early adulthood, he had this great idea. He was just going to pull up roots and move to another place, start all over, start afresh. And I said to him, I said, Danny, it's an interesting plan, but there's a problem with your plan. And he said, what's the problem? And I said, unfortunately, when you go to Arizona, that's where he wanted to go, you have to take you with you. And all this stuff is inside of you. It's not the place, it's you. What we want is to get the good stuff inside of these kids. And there are different pedagogical strategies for that. I mentioned self-determination theory. Google it.
Marvin, I hate to interrupt you, but we need to try and wrap up. So I sent you a chat. If you can try and figure wrap up in another couple of minutes, we'd really appreciate it because we have two other speakers on the panel.
Will do. Okay, not a problem. So I'm not going to go through the methods of this, obviously. We're just going to tell you the other three ideas very quickly. This one's the easy one. The adults in the school have to be the character they want to see in students. The M is for modeling. You can't be a hypocrite. They're watching you constantly. And the most important thing you can do is be the character you want to see in kids. Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. I say, be the character you want to see in students. The E is for empowerment. I don't think that's a hard one in Israel, but I don't know well enough. In any democratic society, we really need to think about fostering the development of future democratic citizens. And as John Dewey taught us, and others have taught us, you don't become a democratic citizen by learning about it. Become a democratic citizen by experiencing the power of your voice in the common sphere searching for the common good. So we have to flatten governance structures in classrooms and schools and enact more empowering pedagogies. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says the first service that one owes to others in community consists in listening to them. We have to make space for voice, and that's adults and kids. And lastly, a developmental pedagogy. We have to think long-term. The goal of this is who these people will be later on. I mean, in Israel, all these kids are going to serve in the military, as far as I understand it. Who are they going to be when they're serving in the military? And then later in life, when they're teachers or lawyers or doctors or farmers or whatever they're going to be, what kind of people will they be then? And it's a different pedagogy between teaching for learning facts now and changing behavior now than it is to invest in the long-term development of kids. As I'll finish with this thought, one of my colleagues said years ago, a brilliant principle, he said, children don't develop in straight lines. And I think that's a very powerful notion. And so I'm going to close with that and say, hopefully this gives you a window into how to think about effective practice in character education and how to redesign your schools and your classrooms so they optimally foster the development of human goodness. Thank you.
Professor Berkowitz, thank you very much for this inspiring and informative talk. It's a pleasure to have you reconnected with education here in Israel after 30 years. We look forward to the opportunity to have you actually come and join us in person. I know that Zavita will be delighted to welcome you to her own university, Bar Ilan, and we'd certainly be happy to welcome you to the University of Haifa. And as soon as the smoke clears and we're all vaccinated and we can begin to travel again, we'll look forward to you being with us here in Israel. And so you can share with us, not in just a short talk, your very rich and thoughtful and well-documented theories, but we can take the whole week that you deserve in order to give us the details, the bells and the whistles, and we can get to know each other and chat and learn from one another. So thank you very much for being with us today.